So, to the people watching this video, I'm going to be chatting here in a couple of moments with Robert Landen, and I want to tell you a little bit about him and what he's done before I invite him to talk with me. He's made a discovery that I think is very important, and built a communication invention on that discovery. And I need to say up front that we're going to be using a term that most people would know intuitively what it means, but I want to make sure it's explicit. And that is the term peaceful people or peaceful person. A peaceful person, as we use the term, is a person who does not harm another peaceful person. That doesn't mean you never harm someone. If you're defending yourself, inflicting a certain amount of harm is perfectly ethical and legitimate. But if someone is not threatening you with violence or threatening a loved one with violence, you leave them alone if you're a peaceful person. So that's a definition that I want you to keep in mind while we're talking. So Robert, you've had a lot of experience with situations that call for interacting with people who are not peaceful, cops, jailers, bailiffs, prosecutors, judges, and so on. And I guess the first thing I want to make clear to our audience is that you are a peaceful person. Is this correct? Am I correct in stating that you are a peaceful person?
Of course.
Of course.
I mean, if you want to be happy, you got to be peaceful. I don't know anybody who's not peaceful that's happy.
Good point. Good point. A lot of the non-peaceful people have all kinds of problems that we peaceful folk don't have, which I'm sure you will mention at some point. So, in spite of being a peaceful person, you've had occasion to appear in court. Now, there's a lot we could say about the events that have led up to that, led up to how you got involved with interacting with cops and their minions. But today, we're just going to focus on what your experience has been in court. How many times have you been in court defending yourself for having done something that was peaceful?
Oh, well, I mean, when I was facing 45 years, that was probably about around 24 times. Went through 5 different judges. They kept switching judges, 4 different prosecutors, and a jury.
And a jury. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, there's many other times that I've been forced into court, coerced into appearing.
Yes, I don't see you as someone who likes to appear in court. There are people who like to appear on stage and like to appear on television. There aren't many who like to appear in court. So,
well,
you're not one who likes.
I'm as good at appearing as I am at disappearing, I guess.
I like the sound of that. All right. So you've been dragged into court against your wishes more times than most.
Yeah.
And in doing that, as soon as you realized, as I understand it, as soon as you realized that this was a pattern occurring in your life, you began looking at different approaches to how you defend yourself in court. And one of the things you learned really well at some point was what would be called a legal approach. Tell us about that first. The legal approach to defending yourself in court.
Challenging jurisdiction?
Is that what you did?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't call it well, I mean, yeah, it's part of their rules. They're supposed to put the evidence on the table that proves the code and the Constitution apply to you, and they never do. And Yeah, I looked at all the different methods of going to court. Now, I could have went straight up defense, self-defense, and probably won because I was attacked. But I didn't do that. I decided to challenge jurisdiction because it was none of their business. You know, for them to come in and say, okay, we're going to punish you for disobeying some rule that I didn't even know existed was ridiculous. So yeah, that was you know, Stefan Molyneux and I, we used to talk a lot, and he told me to talk to Mark Stevens, and Mark Stevens helped me lay it out and put together some motions and stuff. And I went in there with a blank sheet of paper, or a blank sheet of paper, an unsigned plea of guilty. And I said, I'll sign this, even though it goes against my better judgment, if the prosecutor put the evidence on the table. Because that's what they wanted. I was baiting them. You know, they want a guilty plea. That's their goal. Well, as soon as you put the evidence that proves those laws apply to me, then I'll go ahead and sign it. But they never would. They just threatened me and charged me with contempt, uh, forced me to go see psychiatrists, like I'm the one that needed a psychiatrist. It was the prosecutor that couldn't come up with the evidence. Anyway, it was hell. Yeah, it was a nightmare.
That's what it sounds like. I mean, I can
Yeah,
see I can see where you might derive a certain amount of satisfaction pointing out to these people that they were disobeying their own rules, but that didn't make it less of a nightmare, I'm sure.
well, I thought I could sell them on it. I thought I could sell them on doing the right thing and dropping the charges because the prosecutor failed to meet their burden of proof. But they were not going to be sold. I tried everything that I could think of to win them over, but they just got madder and threatened me more and switched judges and switched prosecutors and added more charges. I mean, it was a freaking nightmare. And it's sad too, because I was very kind to all of them. You know, I was very polite and I asked nicely and I tried to win them over, and they just weren't having any of that. It totally didn't work.
That's interesting. You know, one of the things about that approach, which I regard as a legal approach, I know that Mark Stevens developed a whole series of legal strategies. Uh, I remember reading his book, Adventures in Legal Land, back in 2010 or 2011, somewhere around there. What he describes from a legal standpoint is correct. That there are, in fact, rules, procedures that these people are supposed to obey, and they don't obey them. They literally ignore their own rules that are supposed to make them unbiased, impartial, and so forth. And the key, the most important of those, is that whatever they assert, they have to come up with factual evidence to support it. And that's the place where you found the vulnerability and you basically said, okay, I'll go along with whatever you want, just put the evidence on the table here. And
Yeah.
they couldn't do it because the evidence does not exist. All they've got is the scribblings of some politicians who met wearing suits under a dome, and they write their opinions down and call it law. And that's the pretext under which you had been dragged into that situation. So, okay, you did the legal thing, and it didn't work. It made them more and more angry. And then you did something different. Tell us about that.
Well, there's a lot of instances that came to mind of them trying to establish jurisdiction, but I guess we could save those for another time. It was really good. A couple of these prosecutors will make you laugh. They're so ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so yeah, I was in front of the jury that I was reading a script from Mark Stevens. I started to read it to myself, getting ready to read it to the, jury. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it anymore. I folded it up. I put it in my pocket. I said, I just got to speak to you from the heart. Because what was going on was wrong, and I wanted them to understand that I'm a peaceful guy. I've never harmed or threatened to harm another peaceful person in my life. And to let these two, the prosecutor and the judge, I pointed to them, to let these two cage me for the rest of my life for disobeying a rule I didn't even know existed. How could you sleep at night? And I mean, they just ended up calling it a mistrial, tried to retry me. Um, you know, I also at the trial I brought up the violence, the threats that they had against me, even though I hadn't threatened anybody. How's that fair? You know, I brought up a lot of things that didn't make any sense. But anyway, they found an excuse to call a mistrial. So on the fifth judge, I didn't even mention jurisdiction. I was like, that's it. I'm not talking about it anymore. And, you know, I think maybe I can't prove it. I don't know. But this last judge was working with me, trying to help me out, trying to get the charges dropped, dismissed, but she wouldn't let me do it. She kept pushing me toward a public defender. And it was risky. Mark Stevens and those guys tell you never attach a public defender to you. It's death. It's suicide. Don't do it. But I trusted this guy. He was libertarian. He said I could fire him anytime I wanted. And sure enough, he did the same motion I did that was denied, and she approved it, and the case was finally dismissed. Yeah, it was. You got to be a bar member, I guess, for them to dismiss someone. If you're defending yourself, I don't think they're. I mean, not all the time, but I think in general they don't want a non-bar member winning a case.
That's interesting. So
that's what it felt like to me. She, you know, she helped me out. It was good. I was glad to get that over with. Now the prosecutors appealed it, so I actually had to go to Daytona Beach, you know, for the appeals court. You know, they're trying to appeal the dismissal. And a year later, I guess it was the three judges sided with me, and it was finally over. 3 years total, almost to the day.
Wow, what an ordeal!
It's just crazy.
Well, first and foremost, Robert, I want to thank you for putting up with the ordeal to the point where you actually figured out something that is vitally important for everyone to understand. That before you go dealing with a legal argument in defense of oneself, there is a more important argument that gives you more traction, and that's the moral approach. You basically, if I understood you correctly, the thing that got you out of that circumstance was recognizing that they cannot morally justify treating a peaceful person as if they were a violent criminal. And that was the thing that you finally turned to and brought up repeatedly. And finally, people were listening to you. And this is
yeah, it was. Go ahead.
This is the lesson that you're prepared to teach the world. And
well, it's something I had been. Oops.
No, go ahead.
It's something I'd done. My dad had done. We've won over many cops since I was a kid. You know, it's just talking to them like a human being. When I was in court, it was all about the jurisdiction, and I thought I had them, and they couldn't do anything because they couldn't meet the burden of proof. I thought that it had to be over with. But through all the court dates they kept giving me, there was a pivotal point when a judge was asking, or I forgot exactly how it went. He said that to get out of his courtroom or something. I said, I didn't want to be here in the first place. I'm only here because you threatened me with violence. And he jumped up out of his chair and stood up and he yelled. He was mad. And I was like, whoa, I got a hot button here. Bringing up the violence. Should have done this a year and a half ago. I mean, I knew it was something that had been overlooked, challenging jurisdiction, right? When I first went up there to the podium to challenge jurisdiction, I let it go. I let the violence, the fact that they're threatening me with violence to force me to be there. And that was wrong. I should have brought that up right away. It's important that that's brought up immediately when you're talking to a cop, a prosecutor, or a judge. Why am I being threatened with violence? How can you morally justify that? If you can't do it here, how are you going to do it in front of a jury? Because that's where this is going to go, right? I don't, and some cops have said, oh, well, legal this and legal that. And I say, I'm not talking about any of the legal stuff. I'm not talking about politicians' opinions. How can you personally morally justify your behavior? And that's what started what I'm called my moral approach. I just put it all together and said, hey, let's stop it at the cop. Because I used to coach people in court to defend themselves and help them after my ordeal. And I'm like, if I can get them to stop it at the cop, they don't have to go to court. That's where I'm at now. Actually, I'm going to go back to helping people in court, actually.
Indeed. And they're fortunate people that you will be helping because you have the most powerful approach to the problem that I've ever encountered. And I've looked at a lot of them. As I told you, I read Mark Stevens' book, his first book, more than 20 years ago. No, 10 years, more than 10 years ago. So I've been sort of up to date on a variety of approaches, and I really like your approach. I think it is moral. I think it is ethical. I think it is effective more than any of those legal approaches. And I think the reason is it's unexpected. That is, that first of all, people learn their morality very early. By the time you're 5 years old and you're in kindergarten, uh, you're told, don't hit the other kids, don't mess with their stuff, don't steal from them. And those lessons stick with us. You obviously are able to remind people of such lessons that they learned early on in a way that is meaningful, right?
Yeah, well, being fair was part of every kid's growing up, I guess. I mean, you're forced to be with a group of kids. You had to go to school. You had to get along, right? And fairness was important. That's not fair. And a lot of times it's not fair. But in court, it's supposed to be fair. The judge is supposed to be neutral. He's supposed to treat the prosecutor and the defendant exactly the same. He's not supposed to favor one side over the other. Yet they forced me to go do psychological exams when the prosecutor absolutely needed a psychological exam because he couldn't come up with the evidence. He made a claim and he couldn't prove it. But like you said, the moral approach is better. I'd rather win them over on the fact that they can morally justify their actions rather than legally justify it, because you can legally justify pure evil. And it's been done many times throughout history that they've legalized evil acts. And punishing peaceful people for disobedience has got to be one of the most evil acts I've ever heard of. It's not as gruesome as a lot of acts, but it destroys lives. It destroys families. Kids go without their parents. Parents lose their kids. Over what? Disobeying some politician's opinion that nobody even agreed to obey in the first place? Try to win them over. Win the cop over. Win the judge over. Prosecutor, I've had no luck with those guys. Women, men, I don't know what's wrong with prosecutors. They won't even talk to me at all. They absolutely hide. But I've gotten through to judges, and a lot of cops and other people I've helped have gotten through to them. And it just makes sense. Why do harm when no harm has been done?
Exactly. Exactly. So, Robert, it's my hope that you will teach the world this stuff that you've learned. Are you mentally prepared to do that given the opportunity?
Oh, I love it. I love helping people, teaching them this. I blow them away. I love flipping cops. I love getting cops to live by their moral principles instead of punishing people and being a jerk. And they feel better about themselves, because they have discretion. At any time, they can walk away. Even if you broke 100 laws, they don't have to do a damn thing. And if no harm's been done, they can choose to do no harm. And that's pivotal. You got to give them the option. You're going to do the legal evil thing, or you're going to do the good moral thing and keep the peace. It's a great method, I guess you want to call it. Now, I'm not against other methods. I mean, you can stack those on top. Mine doesn't work all the time. Like I'm going to write a letter to a judge and I'm going to stack everything on there. The fact that the prosecutor can't meet their burden of proof and all that. But the very first, everything's going to be about how do you morally justify this? I want them to think about it. I'm tired of them referring to regulations or rules or courtroom procedures or laws or statutes or, all this stuff, trying to justify being a dick. right? You know, you're
Right.
you're being a dick, threatening me, and you're saying because it's the law. Well, prove that law applies to me, and then I'll play your game. But they can't. So it comes down to moral and ethics, right? How can you morally justify what you're doing?
Exactly. Exactly. You know,
Oh,
Robert,
I think it's great. Turns
I,
people around. I love it.
I find you very persuasive, and the audience doesn't know this about you, and I'm going to reveal it, and that is that you've spent your entire adult life in professional sales. So if anyone knows how to be persuasive of these evildoers that you keep have had to deal with, it's obvious that your sales experience has taught you a great deal about human nature and what does it take to change someone's mind in a way that is ethical and makes sense. So you obviously know your way around this subject really well. Okay, so I feel like this has been a really valuable little chat that basically we have introduced the concept to those who are watching the video. And at this point, I'm going to end the recording of the video, and I will pass it on to some people that I think have what it takes to begin the process of getting this information out to the world. Again, as I said, I think it's very valuable information, and there are vast numbers of people who would benefit by having it. So I'm going to say an official goodbye, though I'm not hanging up on you. I'm going to simply stop recording. And I thank you again, both for appearing on this video and also for the perseverance that you have demonstrated.
Huh.
Several, for years now, you've been developing your method, and I am grateful to you for having done that. So
Oh, you're welcome.
here's where we're ending the recording.